Hello, and welcome to Brain Says Strange Things. I'm Patrick, this is my brother Jordan, and this is the podcast where we talk about horror movies. On this episode, we are going to take a look at one of the all-time great genre franchises, the James Bond 007 series of films. I think there's coming up on 30 or so of these movies by now. Maybe not quite that many.
I think it's like 24 or something, somewhere around there.
Okay, so yeah, this is, of course, everybody knows James Bond, a long-running series. We, as is our wont, looked at two of those films this evening, both significant entries in the franchise.
To me, anyway.
Well, I think they are. They both kind of, I think, hold an important place in the franchise. We took a look at Goldeneye, which was the first starring Pierce Brosnan as James Bond, and we also watched Casino Royale, which introduced the current James Bond, I think a great James Bond, Daniel Craig, who will be starring in a new James Bond film in a few months here as of the time of this filming. So he is still out there doing his thing as James Bond. So Goldeneye and Casino Royale are the two that we took a look at tonight. Just really briefly, we are kind of coming at it from sort of different perspectives, you and I, because you, I think it's safe to say, are a James Bond fan.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I've seen all of them.
You've seen all the movies. You know James Bond to an extent that I really don't. I've actually really only seen a handful of the movies for whatever reason.
I used to videotape them when they would do like 14 Days of 007 on TBS and edit out the commercials and stuff.
What is a videotape?
No, never mind. It's kind of like an 8-track.
Yeah, for whatever reason, and I think I always like them when I watch them. I've literally seen. 5 now?
Probably 4 now.
Four or five of them.
You would know better than me.
Yeah. But for whatever reason, it's never been my franchise. I've never jumped in and watched a lot of James Bond movies. I guess maybe you could say I just haven't gotten around to it.
But you don't watch a lot of action movies in general.
Yeah, it's not really my genre. Which is why I started a horror movie podcast.
We
are talking about James Bond.
It's not really our genre.
Yes. But no, these are good movies, and I actually had a lot of fun watching these two tonight. So we watched them in order. So the first one was Goldeneye, which came out, I believe, in 1995. And stop me if I get anything wrong here.
If I notice.
This relaunched the franchise after there had not been a James Bond movie for a number of years. So
the last ones had kind of like tapered off in quality with Timothy Dalton. He's a good Bond, but I mean it kind of died off a little bit there.
Cool.
So this is kind of their attempt to reinvent it.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a reintroduction, kind of a soft reboot of the series, and it introduced Pierce Brosnan for the first time as James Bond in Goldeneye. It was also significantly the first James Bond movie that took place after the fall of the Soviet Union and after the Cold War had essentially ended. And I suspected, and you said that the Russians were kind of the heavy in a lot of the previous James Bond movies.
Not necessarily the Russians, but the Cold War was definitely a part of it. It
definitely played into it. And it does in this movie too, but they kind of had to grapple with the current political and social climate. And I actually thought the movie was really smart in that it kind of went right into it in terms of how do we make James Bond work in a current modern setting where in many ways the character could sort of be seen as outdated. So anyway, it's...
or in this one they call it out and they pretty much tell him, like, hey, you're kind of outdated.
Yes, yeah, and they talk of sexual harassment and all that, but we'll get into that. But the plot it does concern a group of Russians, but kind of rogue agents.
Cossacks.
Yes, who... basically, they want to take over a satellite, and that's what Goldeneye is. It's the name of this satellite that will release this electromagnetic pulse, an EMP, which is like for whatever reason, was like a big thing in movies in like the 90s. Like it was all about these EMPs. You know, everyone's just scared of the computers and all that stuff.
The plot's not that creative in Goldeneye.
No,
I'll give you that.
Yeah, but essentially that's what it is. They want to hijack this satellite.
They want to electronically rob a bank and then cover their tracks by wiping out the computers with EMP.
Yeah, and essentially, you know, it would plunge. The fate of the world is at stake.
Kind of like Fight Club, where they start from scratch, erasing everybody's credit and everything like that. I guess. They kind of throw that in at the end.
Yeah.
That wasn't really what it was all about.
And the lovely Famke Janssen, I really like Famke Janssen, is sort of the femme fatale in this, and she has essentially the superpower. You know, all James Bond's villains are essentially supervillains. She can crush men between her thighs, usually mid coitus. So
she's like
kind of a Black Widow type.
She's like more of a James Bond character than James Bond is in this movie. Almost, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, not being super familiar with the previous ones, I've actually only seen like one movie that comes before this, one of the Sean Connery Bonds.
Well, you know, I liked it. I picked these ones. So I like both of them, which is why I picked them. So
well, I liked it. I liked this movie. I thought that it was. I thought it was a good, entertaining, interesting action movie. It was smart. It wasn't boring. The plot zipped right along. I liked Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. What is your kind of overall take on it? I mean, you like it, but
I loved it as a kid.
Yeah.
And there's a game that was tied into it too.
Is this kind of what got you into Bond, or were you already like into James Bond movies when this new one came out?
I don't remember,
because you would have been only like 13 years old when this movie first came out.
Probably is
You're
what got me into Bond.
The right age.
I don't know. It could have been like around like it's like the chicken or the egg. You know, I'm not really sure what I discovered.
But it was probably coming out around the time you were just getting into it.
Yes,
at least.
and that just like amplified it. So
yeah.
I don't know. It's a really fun franchise, and it's like, well, this one in particular, I remember being like obsessed with like the stunts and everything. And James Bond movies do that a little differently than other action movies, where they're mainly focused on the stunts. They don't really care about the special effects. Try to make it all look as realistic as possible, even though these crazy things are happening. I always like that part of it.
So it's a true action movie franchise in that sense. It's less about CGI and that type of spectacle.
But I always thought about these ones too, and the ones that work is that they're concerned with kind of every aspect of it. Because you can't make this movie like a straight action movie and have it all be action, because you get burned out on that. You have to have, there's like espionage in all of them.
Yes.
And there are scenes like that in all of them too, where it's all about basically him trying to like maintain his composure, you know, pretending to be someone else while ridiculous things are going on around him. That happens in both movies. It happens in like all of the movies. I always like that part of it too. It shows like both aspects of it. Casino Royale does that more, where they show like the smooth, put together aspects of being a spy, and then the brutal, harsh, actually killing. I mean, he has a license to kill, so that's like part of it. It's like, so there will be death involved. I don't know. I always thought it was like a fun character, and they always just kind of existed on their own independent missions. Goldeneye is kind of like a typical '90s movie, but it stands apart a little bit because it's like fashioned in the James Bond mold. So I kind of like that. That it separates it a little bit. It's not like a Steven Seagal movie. Maybe just like in plot wise it is. Otherwise, the characters are better, I think.
Was there anything that was, because I think it's pretty clear when we talk about Casino Royale, some really specific choices they made to differentiate it from what you think of when you think of James Bond. But was there any of that in Goldeneye? Like, given what came before and immediately preceding it, was there any kind of new idea or new style or new tone?
And James Bond is the character?
Well, just in this movie, to like separate it as a James Bond movie, or to maybe take the franchise in a new direction, or was this pretty much in line with what had come before?
Well, the ones directly before with Timothy Dalton, they kind of go in phases, where like Sean Connery started out like as a serious one. His movies got a little more ridiculous. Then they brought in Roger Moore, and his movies are kind of like crazy. Timothy Dalton's more of like a realistic Bond. It's not about fighting bad guys in blimps and all these crazy action scenes. It's more of like down to earth stuff. Goldeneye was kind of like a combination of all those things put together. I think, which is kind of why I think like, you know, Goldeneye is like a quintessential, or not a quintessential, Goldfinger. I think Goldeneye is as well. I think they all have every single bit of element that works really well.
Yeah, I can see.
I don't think it really like separates itself with that. Like, it's hard to pick out why it's so different. It's stylistically different, I think, because
it's just sleeker. It's more modern.
It is sleeker. It has better special effects and better stunts. They kind of ramp it up a little bit. His character is much smoother. Which Pierce Brosnan's not one of my favorite James Bond. He's not. I think James Bond should be a little intimidating. He's very like suave almost, because that's one thing that didn't work in this one. I think is like humor of it. Okay. He's always got a line at the end, and they're not usually like rolling on the floor laughing the line after he kills a guy, but these are just like. Like, almost kind of like painful, like not necessarily that funny. Like maybe
I think there were some funny, clever.
There were some funny lines in it.
Some good lines.
A lot of that stuff though kind of fell flat. I think maybe if they would have focused a little more, did another take or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I like both of these Bonds, but I definitely think that Pierce Brosnan. You're right. He does that kind of smooth, dashing, suave. Kind of comfortable in any situation, never breaks a sweat very well. He's probably like the prettiest Bond, you know what I mean? But he doesn't have that kind of rugged masculinity that some of the other ones had, which I think that is part of what made this entry in the Bond series seem a little bit more. I don't want to say cartoonish, but like moving in that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It goes in waves. More. It started to go that way.
Yeah, it was more like a superhero movie. Like you never really believed that this was like a real guy. You know, he was James Bond. You know, whereas
well, there's even scenes, and you talked about that girl in it, and they're like. Does she ever even get a cut on her face or blood or anything? Yeah, Bond just like cruises. Right, I think at the very end, and maybe they saved it for the end to make it more intense, but. It's not till the very end where you even see like a spot of blood on James Bond. And he's like cruising through all these ridiculous situations. Like there'd be something.
But I don't. In this movie,
it makes sense.
It was okay, because it was that was the tone and level of the movie, and it's it's funny. I haven't seen a lot of these movies, but just like hearing you describe, like it started serious, then it got a little silly, then they had to bring it back. Like there's so many long running franchises that are like that. That start out with these strong initial entries, but as you do movie after movie after movie after movie, it's hard to maintain that consistency. The Batman movies that we reviewed on an earlier episode had that kind of trajectory.
And there's like 5 times more of these movies than Batman.
Yeah, so I think this movie, Goldeneye, did a good job at probably looking at all the previous films, seeing, okay, what works, what didn't, let's give it a modern sheen, and it was a fun James Bond movie for James Bond fans.
Yeah, kind of like it had the actress with the ridiculous name, kind of like a nod to Pussy Galore.
Yeah, what was her name in this movie?
Xenia Onatopp.
Xenia
so it's like it's ridiculous.
It was a cartoon.
It's like,
but
it's cool.
It was good. Yeah, it was consistent within. Now, if Xenia Onatopp would have walked into a Daniel Craig Bond movie, it would have stuck out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, they could do it, but they have to be a little more subtle with it.
They had to be more subtle. So I feel like we keep trying to talk about Casino Royale. Is there anything else for sure we want to get in about GoldenEye? It introduced Judi Dench as M for the first time, who I said brings a real kind of gravitas to the movie in the same way that maybe like Patrick Stewart or Ian McKellen do to like the X-Men movies. Like they kind of like ground all this kind of cartoonish.
I think these movies just work because it's just a great story.
It is. It's a great
story, but a great character.
It's a great franchise. There's all the tropes of James Bond are terrific. So, but then how many movies did Pierce Brosnan do? A handful.
I'm not sure. Probably like 5, I think, maybe something like that.
Which is
4.
Yeah, and then you said they got pretty ridiculous towards the end.
Yes.
More bad CGI. And
yeah, they started to stray away from it, and it's like that's kind of the period in movies where they're like discovering CGI, and that's like the big thing now.
Yeah.
Like have an entire character. Like when the Star Wars prequels came out, it was a big deal that Jar Jar was
God, yeah.
It's just like it's all how you use it. Like James Bond doesn't need special effects, but they're the big thing at the time, so let's have it in there.
Yeah.
And I do remember that. I think even that was a Roger Ebert quote that talked about that, where there's that scene where it's a fully computer generated James Bond like riding a wave on a surfboard, and it's just like forget it.
And
like, we're so far away from where this character is. Let's just need to start over.
Yeah.
And James Bond went away for a while,
and he did.
And the company went like bankrupt that produced it. And then this is reinventing it again, just like Goldeneye kind of did. Same director.
Yep. So they brought back the same director, whose name is
Martin Campbell.
Martin Campbell. So came back to again reintroduce then James Bond in 2005. So it's shocking to me that I still think this guy is like the new Bond.
Yeah.
But this movie is 10 years old now. So yeah, Daniel Craig was brought in as I think a pretty different James Bond, a blonde James Bond.
Yeah. He's more of a clumsy Bond. He's like a brute.
Yeah, he's definitely.
That's very different than the other Bonds.
He's a good-looking man, but he's not pretty in the way that Pierce Brosnan was. He's definitely has more of that kind of rugged masculinity. I mean, you believe that this guy could really, when he hits you, it's it's a real punch. So yeah, this is a true reboot of the franchise. Like you said, that
that's an origin story.
Yeah, well, and like I asked you, like, do they all kind of have the same continuity? It's supposed to be a continuing story. You said they pretty much stand alone, but they can kind of fit together. But this one is clearly a reboot, right? This is his origin. This is the origin of James Bond. And you don't realize how much of an origin story it is until it really gets even towards the end. But he becomes a 00 agent. Essentially, he gets his license to kill at the beginning of the film. So this is him early in his career.
Yep.
Ava Green is the name of the woman who plays the excellent Bond girl in this movie. Beautiful and just a great character, great actress.
She's one of my faves.
Daniel Craig is a terrific actor, and he does a great job as James Bond. So this is based, you said loosely, on Casino Royale, the novel, the original James Bond novel. And it essentially involves a high-stakes poker game. The villain, well-known actor now from Hannibal. Do you know his name?
No.
The guy from Hannibal
Nicholson, something
does
like
great as the villain in this. He has this creepy thing where he cries tears of blood. It's very disturbing, but it's just on the edge of cartoonish because this James Bond.
Yeah, that's like a Bond villain in a new era.
In the new era, that's how they do it. It's very grounded. You would never have.
You wouldn't have Oddjob.
You wouldn't have Oddjob. You wouldn't have the girl killing with his thighs. It's very.
Not that there's something wrong.
No.
But it wouldn't fit.
But this is a much more grounded. You don't want to call this movie realistic because there are some absurd, and I mean wonderfully absurd, over-the-top action sequences. Really impressive. But nothing like what would ever happen in real life.
No.
But given that, it is a more gritty, kind of realistic James Bond. There's no Q.
There's hardly like MI6. Like, he's just being initiated.
Yeah.
He's just become a 00, so he's basically just a secret agent.
Right.
And he's kind of like discovering things along the way that's what separates him as being James Bond, as opposed to being 006 or 005. Like, this is why he's important to the whole company.
So I loved this movie. And I kind of, I really liked it. And I feel like if I had been like a James Bond, like a super fan when the movie came out, I really would have loved it.
That's why it kind of sticks with me.
You know what I mean?
Like, I was into it and I was excited. And even I thought when they cast Daniel Craig, I was like, James Bond is not blonde.
Right, I remember you saying that, yeah.
I don't know what I was thinking back then, but I don't know. That's just because I was like so stuck in my ways of what I thought James Bond was. But I was blown away by it too.
Yeah,
I thought it was just like a really fun movie.
It's
really got the espionage twists and turns, double crosses, triple crosses, and not like super obvious stuff that you don't see coming. I didn't see the end coming. I don't know if you did.
No, it was well done.
And it also perfectly explains why he's so. I mean, you could say like, yeah, he's a cardboard cutout character who doesn't care about anything. But having seen this and like everything that every single person he's trusted has betrayed him, and it's a matter of like life and death. He probably would kind of be like that.
It gets into
it explains it enough.
That's what I mean about it being like an origin story on like many levels. It kind of gets into the psychology of James Bond. You could probably liken this to something like Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight movies, in that they take this popular, fun action movie character, but they bring it down to earth a little bit. They treat it a little bit more in an adult way, take it a little bit more seriously.
Well, then they spend time
it's
to like.
Great.
They'll spend time to explain like where all his technology came from.
Yeah.
Does it perfectly make sense?
Right.
Not really, but like they'll explain like his armor and how the cape works and all that stuff.
Right, for Batman, yeah.
Yeah, whereas like you don't need that to be in a Batman
Right.
movie, but if they're kind of going for that tone, then it's like it's perfect.
Yeah, it's just cool to me.
And
it's
this one didn't have like all the gadgets and everything. And It didn't really need it.
It's kind of in a way, and I don't want to go too far with this because people haven't seen it. We'll give them you would get the wrong idea. This is a James Bond movie. Mm-hmm. There are big stunts. There are big special effects. Go for the girls and the guns. It's a James Bond movie, but within that context, it is a lot more interesting to me to see this type of a James Bond, like to see him struggling with how he feels about killing people. You said in the Pierce Brosnan movie, he doesn't get hardly a spot of blood on him. This James Bond gets bloody. Mm-hmm. There's blood. There's bruises.
He dies.
There's psychological stuff going on. I love that scene where he's choking the guy in the stairwell and the girl sees it. It was this really brutal, intense scene, and then they're crying in the shower together later. This is not a typical boom, bad guy's dead, and then James Bond makes a quip. But yet, everything we're seeing in this movie is leading up to where does that character, who can just kill someone, make a joke, come from? This is the psychology that underlines that character. Mm-hmm. So I just feel like it's the kind of stuff nerds love. You know, when you take this cartoon character and
there's a lot of good lines. That scene with them on the train, the interplay between them, Vesper and Bond. I always like that part at the end too, where he says that she's like, "It doesn't bother you to kill people." He says, "I wouldn't be good at my job if it did." Mm-hmm. It's that's just kind of a really simple way of summing.
There's
it up.
a lot of really great. There's a lot of really great moments in this movie that sum up the tone of this James Bond movie in particular. Even little things like he asks for a vodka martini at the bar at one point, and he's distressed about something at this point, and the guy goes, "Do you want a shaken or stirred?" And he says, "Does it look like I give a damn?" You know what I mean? This is not a cartoon character. This is a man struggling with something. And then at the end, near the end, there's 5 endings to this movie. It keeps ending. When he's with the girl on the beach, and he makes some joke about some sexual innuendo, and that would ordinarily be where the movie would end if it was another James Bond movie. But she says something like, "You're not going to let me in."
It's here come the jokes.
Yeah, exactly.
Another deflection.
He's putting up this armor, he hides behind this persona, and then he says, well, a lot of good stuff happens after that. So, yeah, I just really like this movie. Mm-hmm. And the structure of the movie was interesting. It's Casino Royale, so I knew it was about gambling, and the whole thing is this high-stakes poker tournament. And I joked before we started watching it that, I hope there's a lot of scenes of watching people play cards, because that sounds boring. But, in fact, I actually do kind of like that in movies when it's well done, and I thought that was well done in this movie. Well,
here's, good movies, if you need really good characters.
Yeah.
And good characters married with good actors, kind of
they
do the work for you.
And this movie was that.
So it's you could put any two characters in a scene. The scene with him and that Jeffrey Wright, CIA agent, in the hallway, or on the stairwell, where he's fronting him the money. He's trying to stop him because Bond is he's lost all his money at that point, and now he's just fuck this mission, I'm just going to go kill this guy. And he took a knife, and he's like, hold on, calm down.
Yeah.
That's a really good scene. With two kind of or with one, minor character, I guess. But it doesn't really matter because it's a good actor and a good character,
right.
So it's you could put any two characters together. And there's also really tense scenes between the two villains. It's Bond doesn't always need to be in every single scene,
Yeah.
If the characters and the actors are good, then you can just kind of put them in a room together and it's interesting to watch. And I thought that at the poker table scene too, where it's everybody's in character all in the same scene. I thought it really worked.
Yeah,
because I don't know anything about poker, but I still found it
right. It was a real grown-up movie in the way that some of the other James Bond movies to me don't always seem as though they are. You know what I mean? So I liked that about it. I thought that was really good. It's not a perfect movie. There were some, I would say, we maybe have some minor gripes with it. the whole trope of the villain at the table and his really super obvious tell.
But I mean, he is a guy that cries blood too,
right.
so it's like it's always like a little delicate balance. Like, how far do you take this? Like,
right.
if we give him a tell that no one notices,
right.
then the audience doesn't notice.
Yeah,
it's like a real tell. Like this guy's like one of the best gamblers in the world,
right?
And his tell is to be like.
Right, right. He looks like the most
He's the most uncomfortable man at the table.
And then
every other extra is just like sitting there like.
They have the one scene where the guy who's helping Bond has to point out to the girl, is like, that's his tell when he does that. You know, like the audience, just to make sure the audience
when you can see it from across the room.
Yeah.
Like, what does that say?
So there were a few things like that in this movie that you're just like, oh, it's such a smart movie. You know, and I think the movie was smart enough to maybe.
I think it knew that not everybody's like a poker expert.
Well, I think it maybe should have trusted its audience a little bit more in some of those kind of situations, you know. But that is a minor gripe. For the most part, this is a really entertaining action suspense movie with good character stuff in it. So I don't know that I'll ever become like a huge Bond guy. I don't know that day will come when I'll want to sit down and just like watch through the whole series, but I do like the Daniel Craig Bond movies. I think they're good. Mm-hmm. How I saw the Skyfall, yep. the newest one. I thought that was good too, which kind of reintroduced some of the classic elements like Moneypenny and A New Q. But how are the other Daniel Craig James Bond movies? Like,
there's only one other one.
Oh, well, okay.
Which is the Quantum of Solace.
And how is that one?
That has the reputation of being the worst one.
Uh-huh.
I think the director is that Paul Greengrass guy who did.
Yeah, he does the
Bourne movies, and
well, he's supposed to be good.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people's complaints, and I see this, is that it was a good action movie, but it wasn't a Bond movie.
Okay,
it kind of seemed like it was a Bourne Identity movie.
Okay,
with James Bond in it.
Yep.
And I guess I kind of see that a little bit. The villain's kind of lame. And after something like Casino Royale, where it's like, I always thought Casino Royale was the Bond movie where it's finally about Bond, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the other ones were like, it's kind of like the Batman movies, like, well, how are we going to separate this from the other ones by having a different kind of villain?
Right.
What's the new villain going to be? What's the new
right.
Bond girl? It's like everything surrounding
it. Right.
This is like starting from scratch. And then after you go in that direction, then the next one is just kind of like a middle of the road kind of action movie. It just kind of like undersells it, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's a good movie, but it's hard to even classify it as a Bond movie. Really.
Interesting.
But of course, Daniel Craig's really good in it.
Uh-huh.
The Bond girls aren't really that memorable, and neither is the villain. Maybe that's the problem with it. Mm-hmm. Kind of an odd story too. I don't know.
I don't know the title.
Yeah, it had a troubled title too a little bit.
Do you have high hopes for Spectre?
Yeah. I always have high hopes for James Bond movies. I always want them to be good. There are certain movies like by directors, and this is like the only franchise that I'll go to every one.
Yeah.
I always go to see the new James Bond movie just because, I mean, even the bad ones are fun. Mm-hmm. So it's like you never lose.
You get something.
Yeah, you get something out of it.
So these two, Casino Royale and Goldeneye, are two of your favorites, and I think they both were good movies. What would you say would be other kind of essential or favorites James Bond films that people could maybe check out after they see these two?
Well, you saw Goldfinger.
Yes, I saw Goldfinger.
Goldfinger's another one where it kind of feels like Goldeneye. I mean, I already said that, but kind of feels like all the elements are falling into place finally.
It's quintessential kind of classic James Bond.
Yeah, you kind of get everything out of that one.
Everything that you'd want out of the classic era of James
what
Bond.
else? Thunderball is one that I really like. That's kind of like that too.
Which Bond is that?
That's Sean Connery. That's like towards the end of Sean Connery's run, I think. Mm-hmm. Or maybe not. Maybe that's like the fourth or something like that. But I don't know. I really like that one, and a lot of people don't. It has a weird, they all have different themes to them, and this one's like a water theme, so like everything pretty much takes place on the water. There's boat chases and there's scuba diving and like, but I think all of it works. Maybe people didn't see that as James Bond, I don't know, but I thought that was a really fun movie. Had kind of everything. He's being chased by sharks. It's cool. What else? Roger Moore's View to a Kill I like because it's so silly. Mm-hmm. It's got Christopher Walken as a villain.
There you go. Sold.
What else? Octopussy is a good one.
Cool.
I only remember the action scenes in that one.
Didn't you go to space at one point?
Yeah, that was Moonraker. Moonraker's pretty forgettable too, even though he's in space, which it shouldn't be. It should be memorable if James Bond finally goes into space, but it's not.
Well, they've all got everyone's got to go to space at some point. We did our sequels in space episodes. So.
Now, if you fought Jason in space or Hellraiser or something, now you got something.
That would be a movie.
I think all the actors have like a good one. You know, there's like 4 or 5 different actors that play Bond. They all, well, George Lazenby, of course, he's got one.
Yeah,
which isn't that great either. But they've all pretty much got like at least one. Some have more than one. So I don't know. It's a very strong series all the way through. So
cool.
You could probably pick any actor and pick a random one. Like even Timothy Dalton has some. Like The Living Daylights is kind of fun. So I don't know.
Cool.
These are my 2 favorite by these 2 actors, though.
Yeah. Well, I definitely like these 2, especially Casino Royale. I thought it was just a good movie, just a good, smart movie with real characters. So, all right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up, unless you have any final thoughts about Bond.
No, I have too many thoughts.
We won't get you started. We might have to do a part 2 sometime. But it is a good franchise.
I will return.
And, yes, we will return, as James Bond always returns with another episode of Brain Says Strange Things. I'm going to check out some more of these movies.
I'll put together a box set for you.
Yeah, right on. And you guys definitely check out Casino Royale and Goldeneye, or rewatch them. A lot of people have probably already seen them, I'm sure. And we'll all go see Spectre when that comes out in September.
I'm there.
All right, cool. All right, well, thanks you guys for watching. We will, as I said, return with another episode of Brain Says Strange Things real soon. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye.